I want you to imagine, just for a moment, you're trying to complete a seemingly simple everyday task, like something so totally mundane that you usually do it on autopilot.
Right, like making coffee or something.
Yeah, exactly. But let's say you are just trying to tape up a cardboard box to ship an item you sold online.
Oh, okay, sure.
You have a flat piece of cardboard, a roll of packing tape, a pair of scissors, and the item itself. And for the vast majority of people, this is maybe a 3-minute chore. You fold the flaps, you rip the tape, you seal the box. You don't even think about it.
Right, you're probably listening to a podcast or thinking about what you're having for dinner while you do it.
Exactly. It's totally mindless. But I want you to imagine a scenario where, instead of a quick chore, your heart suddenly starts racing the very moment you pick up the scissors.
Wow. Oh.
You are actively, desperately trying to tell yourself to calm down, but your hands are just moving faster and faster on their own, and your desk becomes this chaotic, visually loud mess of cardboard scraps, jagged edges, and loose tape, just sticking to everything.
That sounds incredibly stressful.
It is. And by the time the box is finally sealed, you are literally panting. Like you are completely physically exhausted, sitting in this pile of debris, feeling a profound sense of disgust. And the question is, why in the world would a mundane task trigger a physiological panic response that looks more like a fight-or-flight survival situation?
Yeah, it really shatters our standard assumptions about how the brain manages everyday friction. I mean, for most people, a task like taping a box operates almost entirely in the background of their consciousness.
Right.
The motor functions and spatial reasoning, they're automated. But we have to ask what happens when that automation fails. And a background process suddenly demands, every single ounce of your conscious cognitive bandwidth. You are no longer just folding cardboard.
You fighting a war.
Exactly.
Yep.
You are actively fighting a war against your own executive function.
Okay, let's unpack this. Pun intended, I guess, with the whole packing a box thing. Decoding the mechanics of that specific war is our mission for this deep dive. The source material we have today is this incredibly compelling, deeply personal, and highly analytical firsthand account.
It really is a fascinating read.
It's written by an individual who was diagnosed with ASD about 8 years ago, and who also strongly identifies with ADHD traits. And what is so fascinating about this author is just how surgically they dissect their own daily existence.
Yes, the level of self-awareness is incredible.
For years, they struggled to figure out why blending into society felt like climbing a mountain with a refrigerator strapped to their back.
Oh, yeah.
They looked at it through the lens of being an adult child or maybe dealing with severe attachment issues before finally realizing that the intense friction they were experiencing was fundamentally rooted in their developmental neurology.
Which gives us a very distinct, mature baseline for our analysis today. We are looking through the eyes of someone who has already passed the hurdle of accepting their diagnosis. They aren't in denial at all.
No, not at all.
But they are still actively, daily, wrestling with the friction that this unique wiring causes in a world built for, neurotypical operating systems. We aren't just here to catalog their struggles. We really need to look at the why.
The mechanics behind it.
Right, connecting these highly specific micro-anxieties to broader concepts of human cognition, sensory processing, and ultimately systemic societal design.
So let's start with that cardboard box. The author tells this story about packing an item they sold on Mercari. They sit down at their desk, and they know their own tendencies, so they make a very conscious, deliberate effort to stay calm.
A preemptive strike against the anxiety?
Yeah, exactly. They give themselves a pep talk, like, I'm going to do this slowly. I'm going to measure twice and cut once. But despite that conscious effort, their physical speed uncontrollably accelerates.
It just takes over.
It totally takes over. They describe becoming breathless, panting, and ending up totally exhausted. And I'm trying to wrap my head around the measuring part of this story, because it feels like a total paradox to me.
How so?
Well, the author is cutting down a piece of cardboard to fit the item. They have a ruler. They know the exact dimensions they need. The math is definitively solved, right?
Yeah, the data's right there in front of them.
But when they take the pen to draw the line, anxiety just completely overrides the logic. They compulsively add an extra 5 millimeters, then maybe another centimeter.
Yeah.
Out of this intense, irrational fear that the item, won't fit.
Oh, that is such a key detail.
If they literally have a ruler and know the math, what is actually happening in the brain's priority queue that forces them to add an extra centimeter? I mean, why does fear override a hard number?
What's fascinating here is that you are assuming that the brain is acting as a neutral calculator.
I mean, yeah, a ruler is objective.
It is, but in this state, the brain is absolutely not objective. In neurotypical executive functioning, once a measurement is taken, the brain categorizes that variable as solved.
Check mark. Done.
Exactly. It puts a check mark next to it and shifts all its energy to the motor function of actually cutting the cardboard. But for this author, the ASD and ADHD traits manifest as a profound inability to trust that sequential plan.
So they just second-guess the ruler.
The brain gets stuck in a predictive loop of anticipating failure. The anxiety of the unknown, like what if the cardboard is thicker than I thought? What if the tape pulls it tighter? What if I made a millimeter error in my initial calculation?
Oh, wow. So it's cascading what-ifs.
Right.
Yeah.
That microscopic possibility of failure completely overrides the executive function required to just execute the cut. The brain is prioritizing the threat of a mistake over the empirical data of the ruler.
It's like trying to parallel park a car you've owned for 5 years.
Yeah.
You know the dimensions of your car. You've parked it in spots exactly this size 100 times. But in that specific moment, pure anxiety distorts your spatial reality, and your brain convinces you the car is suddenly, I don't know, a foot wider than it actually is.
That is a perfect analogy.
You just stop trusting the mirrors and you just panic.
That analogy hits the underlying mechanism perfectly. Because the structural plan breaks down, the physical execution becomes completely haphazard. The author is no longer calmly following a sequence of steps.
They're just reacting.
Exactly. They are rapidly, defensively reacting to their own escalating anxiety. Every cut is a negotiation with panic.
Which naturally leads to the physical environment completely falling apart.
Yeah.
I mean, the author describes how, as they're making these anxious, adjusted cuts, the workspace disintegrates into total chaos.
Oh yeah, the visual clutter.
They've got the bottom of the box, the top, the sides, all these separate pieces. And scattered all around them are cardboard scraps, little bits of backing tape, pens, box cutters, scissors. And this lack of visual order causes the author intense mental disgust and distress.
It becomes a secondary source of panic.
Right. They literally cannot focus on the cut they were trying to make because the visual noise of the scattered tools is just screaming at them.
It triggers an immediate sensory and cognitive bottleneck. We often think of clutter as just a minor annoyance, something you clean up when you have a spare moment.
Yeah, a messy desk is just a messy desk for most people.
Exactly. But for someone with these neurological traits, a lack of visual order can actually be processed by the amygdala as a physical threat to their internal equilibrium.
A physical threat? Just from some scraps of cardboard?
Yes, because the brain is trying to process the complex spatial task of assembling the box, but it is simultaneously being bombarded by the disorganized stimuli of the scraps and scissors. The visual field is demanding processing power that the brain simply does not have to spare.
Wow. And that bottleneck leads to a really fascinating psychological swing. The author identifies this as their tendency toward all or nothing, or black and white thinking.
The extremes.
Yeah. The frustration of the messy desk and the crooked, overmeasured cuts hits a critical mass. There is no middle ground where they can say, well, it's a little ugly, but it'll ship.
Right. Good enough doesn't exist in that moment.
Exactly. Instead, they feel this intense, burning desire to either completely start from zero, like throw the whole box away and get a fresh piece of cardboard, or just throw everything in the trash, cancel the sale, and give up entirely. It is perfection or absolute destruction.
And if you look at the caloric and cognitive energy required to navigate that emotional swing, the panting makes complete sense.
Oh, because they're physically exhausted by the mental shift.
Right. Moving from I must do this perfectly to I'm in complete chaos and danger to I must destroy this and start over requires a massive spike in cortisol and adrenaline. The author isn't physically exhausted from the muscular effort of cutting cardboard.
They're exhausted from fighting a localized neurological war.
Precisely.
Which brings up one of the most profound moments in the source material, I think. The author takes this very personal, isolated, lonely moment of struggle at their desk and connects it to the entire globe.
This was a brilliant observation on their part.
It really was. They mentioned coming across a video on Instagram of someone they identify as a tribesperson in Africa living in an environment far removed from modern urban infrastructure. And in this video, this person is engaged in some sort of packing or wrapping task with natural materials.
So a very similar mechanical action.
Yes. And the author watches as this person exhibits the exact same panicked, disorganized, hyper-fast, breathless behavior that they experience over the Mercari box.
It strips away all the clinical pathology of the developed world.
Right. The author writes about how massive a relief it was to see that. because it visually proves that these neurobiological realities exist everywhere. They exist regardless of whether a society has a diagnostic and statistical manual or the medical vocabulary for autism spectrum or ADHD.
The tribal environment doesn't have pharmaceutical interventions or cognitive behavioral therapy clinics, but the underlying human phenotype is identical.
It's just a different human operating system.
Yes, and the friction in the brain's processing pathways when confronted with a multivariable spatial task manifests in the exact same physical symptoms no matter where you are. It fundamentally shifts the perspective from a narrative of personal failing or modern societal illness to a narrative of natural biological reality.
And the author notes it gave them a profound sense of shared humanity. Like they realize, I am not just uniquely broken.
And it reframed their own family history, too.
The part about their father.
Yeah. They note that their father suffered from the exact same panicked episodes during physical tasks, which the family used to just write off as him having a short temper or being clumsy. Seeing that video allowed the author to see the systemic, inherited reality of their own neurology.
It takes away the blame.
But, I mean, if a static box on a quiet desk causes a system crash of this magnitude, I can't even imagine what happens when you introduce elements that have their own external timers, like, say, cooking on a hot stove.
Oh, the kitchen is essentially the ultimate gauntlet for executive function.
The ultimate gauntlet.
I like that.
You are managing time, thermodynamics, physical coordination, and sequencing simultaneously, and none of those variables will pause if you get overwhelmed. The fire doesn't stop just because you're stressed.
No, it doesn't. And the author explicitly tackles the myth of multitasking when it comes to these multi-step daily chores. They describe what they call brain panic.
Which is such an apt phrase.
Picture the scene they paint for us. They have the gas stove on, heating up a pan of oil. At the exact same time, they are trying to chop vegetables on a cutting board, and the microwave is running behind them.
That's a lot of inputs.
For a neurotypical person, this is just making dinner. It's a Tuesday night. But for the author, their head is literally ready to explode. They explain that this specific sensory and cognitive overload is why there are so many common tropes about neurodivergent individuals constantly burning food or putting salt in a dish instead of sugar.
And it is rarely a lack of culinary skill or knowledge.
Right, it's not that they don't know how to cook.
No, it is an inability to filter out and automate simultaneous processes. Working memory is a finite resource, and in this scenario, it is being instantly overdrawn.
I think of it like a computer's RAM, random access memory. If you have a decent computer, it can handle a lot of things. But if you open up 40 high-definition video tabs in your browser all at once, the computer isn't broken.
The hardware is perfectly fine?
Yeah, the hardware is fine, but the cooling fan starts screaming, the cursor freezes, and the whole system locks up. It just does not have the active memory to process 40 moving videos at the exact same millisecond.
The concept of background processing is really the dividing line here.
How do you mean?
Well, neurotypical individuals possess a highly robust capacity for passive monitoring. When a neurotypical person puts a pan of oil on a hot stove, their brain flags the heat, sets a subconscious internal timer, and then pushes that awareness into the background.
So you don't have to actively stare at the pan.
Exactly. They can then dedicate almost all their active focus to chopping the carrots. They don't have to consciously think about the pan until the oil sizzles at a specific frequency or that internal timer alerts them.
But the author is saying they don't have that background app installed at all. Everything requires manual processing.
Precisely. Every single sensory input demands front and center active cognitive energy. The sizzling pan is taking up 33% of their conscious thought. The knife moving through the carrot is taking up 33%. The hum of the microwave is taking up 33%.
So the math just doesn't work out.
No. The brain is manually juggling these inputs second by second. So when they reach for a white powder to season the food, there is literally no processing power left to verify if it is salt or sugar. The system crashes, the wrong ingredient goes in, or the food burns because the brain was too busy monitoring the knife to check the pan.
And this RAM overflow doesn't politely stay confined to the kitchen either. I mean, the author expands this concept to the outside world, and the spillover is brutal.
Walking down the street.
Yeah, they describe how simply commuting, literally just walking outside, floods their brain with so much sensory data that their mind literally goes blank. The noise of traffic, the visual clutter of billboards, the unpredictable movement of pedestrians, they call it their memory getting punctured.
It's a great metaphor. The environmental data is forcing the open tabs to crash. The brain prioritizes immediate sensory processing to navigate the physical space safely.
Because cars are a physical threat.
Right, which means higher-level cognitive functions, like remembering where you were going or what you needed to buy at the store, are temporarily deleted just to free up RAM.
And think about how this manifests in a workplace. The author gives a brutally relatable example that I think anyone can picture. Imagine a neurodivergent employee standing in an office, and their boss is giving them complex verbal instructions for a project.
Oh, this happens all the time.
The employee is nodding. They look like they are actively listening. But inside, they are totally unable to process a single word the boss is saying.
Because of the sensory load.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because 90% of their cognitive energy is being sucked up by analyzing the micro-expressions on the boss's face, trying to decipher the exact tone of their voice, while simultaneously trying to filter out the sound of a printer in the background and the visual movement of coworkers walking behind the boss's head.
The verbal instructions just bounce off the hull because the RAM is entirely full,
They literally can't hear the words because they're too busy processing the room.
which leads to a tragic, systemic misinterpretation. Society often views this external behavior and labels the person as careless, lazy, or a poor listener.
The boss walks away thinking they just don't care about this project.
When in reality, that employee is working 10 times harder than anyone else in the room just to manage the sensory input of the room itself. The internal mechanism is running at 100% capacity, but the external output looks like zero.
The author doesn't just present this as a hopeless situation, though. They share their specific coping mechanism for cooling down this brain heat.
The hard stop.
Yeah. When they feel the panting start, when the RAM is maxing out, they force a full hard stop on all tasks. They literally drop the knife, step away from the stove, take a deep breath, consciously restart their internal system, and only then go back in.
A manual reboot.
And they repeat that cycle as many times as necessary. They note that it significantly reduces the intense heating they used to experience, though they admit the underlying friction. The fact that cooking takes this much mental management is always still there.
And as a method of self-regulation, it is highly effective. But we have to acknowledge the environmental luxury of that coping mechanism.
What do you mean, luxury?
Well, you can step away from your own stove. You control the timeline in your own kitchen.
Ah, right. But you can't reboot an assembly line.
Exactly. The real friction ignites when this unique operating system, a brain that requires manual reboots, absolute environmental control, and hyper-focused singular attention, is forced to interface with a neurotypical group setting.
Where other people are in charge.
Right, where the timeline, the pacing, and the environment are entirely dictated by others.
Which brings us to an incredible story in the source material about the paradox of efficiency. Like, what happens when extreme speed actually becomes a liability?
This is one of the most revealing parts of their account.
The author discusses their attempt to enter the workforce. They mention that they actually became a shut-in after university job hunting failed, so they have no formal corporate work experience. To prepare for society, they attend a youth support station.
Which is basically designed to be a cushion.
Yeah, a controlled environment to build confidence and basic vocational skills before entering the real working world.
It is a very common rehabilitative structure. It relies on low-stakes tasks to build stamina and routine. Right. So they participate in a one-week vocational training event at a local chamber of commerce. And the task is incredibly straightforward. Stuffing flyers into envelopes. The staff sets it up as a highly subdivided assembly line. There's a 6-person group.
Standard division of labor.
Right. One person gathers a set of flyers, hands them to the next person who folds them, hands them to the next person who opens the envelope, and so on. It is designed to be easy, low-stress social rehabilitation.
It doesn't rely on individual excellence. It relies entirely on synchronization. Everyone must move at the exact speed of the group for the line to function.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The author sits down and looks at this 6-person chain, and their brain instantly optimizes the entire process.
They see the inefficiencies right away.
They realize, I can do this entirely by myself, and I can do it exponentially faster than waiting for these 5 other people. The structure of the assembly line isn't helping them. It's actively impeding their brain's natural processing speed.
It's a bottleneck for them.
So the author just starts working at their own optimal pace. They break the group rhythm, they work incredibly fast, building up massive stockpiles of folded flyers between them and the next person in line, and this entirely disrupts the flow.
The neurotypical team members start getting stressed out.
Yeah, they get nervous because the author is essentially burying them in inventory.
The author's capacity for hyperfocus has hijacked the group dynamic. They are no longer participating in a synchronized social activity. They are mathematically optimizing a system that the others are just trying to casually participate in.
So the staff naturally intervenes. They pull the author aside and offer what they think is an accommodation. They tell the author, you don't need to rush, slow down, take it easy, relax, and just match the pace of the group.
Which sounds completely reasonable to a neurotypical brain.
Right, but the author emphasizes a crucial counterintuitive point here. Being forced to operate at that inefficient speed and deviating from their own personal logic caused them immense physical and mental stress.
We have to look at the neurology of pacing here. For a neurotypical person, slowing down is passive. It is a release of energy. You just relax.
You just don't work as hard.
Exactly. But for a hyper-focused neurodivergent brain, slowing down requires active suppression. It goes back to the RAM allocation we were talking about earlier.
Because they have to manage the slowing down.
Yes. If their brain clearly sees the most efficient path to completion, forcing them to take the inefficient path requires them to actively monitor their own speed, consciously suppress their instinct to optimize, constantly check the pace of the people around them, and manually apply the brakes every single second.
Wow, that sounds exhausting.
It is agonizingly taxing. The friction of suppression generates more cognitive heat than the effort of the actual work.
It's like taking a champion racing greyhound and forcing it to walk in a three-legged race at a company picnic.
That's a brilliant visual.
The staff thinks, oh, a slow walk is easy, it's relaxing, we are doing the dog a favor by not making it run. But for the greyhound, it's physical torture. Its biomechanics are built to sprint. Forcing it to stumble along at a synchronized crawl against its natural gait is just agonizing.
That's exactly it.
So the author advocates for themselves. They ask the staff, can I please just do this alone at my own table?
A request for environmental and operational control.
And the staff agrees. They give the author a small table by themselves. And the results are absolutely staggering. While the six-person team, working together in their synchronized rhythm, completes about 50 envelopes in a set time, the solo author, working in their own hyper-focused rhythm, completes 150 units.
3 times the output.
One single person produced 3 times the output of a six-person team.
If we connect this to the bigger picture and look at it purely through the lens of capitalism, you would assume any business manager would look at that output and say, incredible, we found our star employee, give them whatever they want.
Right, promote them immediately.
But the staff at the youth support station had a completely different reaction.
They were deeply worried. The author notes that the staff wasn't thrilled at all. They were concerned.
Because they've seen this movie before.
Exactly. They explained to the author that this burning fast approach is exactly what they want to train people to avoid. Because historically, they see individuals with developmental disorders enter the workforce, work at this blistering, hyper-focused pace for a few months, inevitably hit severe burnout syndrome, and then completely abandon the job.
It's the fundamental tension between sprint capacity and marathon endurance. The staff is operating on a neurotypical paradigm of sustainability. Slow, steady, consistent output, day after day, year after year.
But the author is sprinting.
Yes, they recognize that while the author's output is phenomenal in a 1-hour burst, the author is burning through their neurochemical reserves at a completely unsustainable rate.
And they are absolutely right to be concerned, because the author admits in the text that even after their solo triumph of 150 envelopes, they went home panting, totally depleted, and physically exhausted.
They proved they could do it better, but they still paid a massive physical toll.
They couldn't dial it back. The author writes about being frustrated with themselves for blindly trusting this hyperspeed mode, knowing it leads to exhaustion.
Yeah.
But it begs an absolutely massive question. Is this intense neurodivergence a disability that must be managed, suppressed, and medicated, or is it a high-octane fuel that society is just using entirely incorrectly?
That is the pivotal shift in the author's narrative, and it is a brilliant reframing. We are moving from merely observing the friction of the disabled experience to questioning the entire utility model of the neurodivergent brain in a modern economy.
The author starts reflecting on history. They look at individuals who have achieved explosive results, people who have literally changed the world, inventors, artists, eccentric founders, and they hypothesize that many of these titans likely utilize the deficits of their developmental disorders as an explosive fuel.
The traits we pathologize today, the profound ability to obsess over a single topic for days, The complete disregard for social convention in favor of logical efficiency, the capacity for hyperfocus that borders on the superhuman.
Those are the things that change the world.
Exactly. These are the exact same traits that drive paradigm-shifting innovation.
The author realizes that it's all about how the condition is utilized, which leads them to what they themselves call a very luxurious or arrogant conclusion. But frankly, I think it's a brilliant piece of logic.
Let's hear it.
The author argues that because neurodivergent individuals have such extreme peaks and valleys in their abilities, like they might be terrible at small talk or reading a room, but world-class at pattern recognition or repetitive, rapid execution, they should be allowed to operate completely differently.
Stop trying to fix the valleys.
Yes. The author essentially says, I won't do what I don't want to do, but I can do this specific thing better than anyone else here, so just let me do it my way. They believe the work environment should be adapted entirely to harness their peaks, while completely ignoring their valleys.
It is a radical, profound rejection of the well-rounded employee myth. Our entire educational and corporate infrastructure is built on bringing people's weaknesses up to an acceptable baseline.
Right. Everyone has to be a team player.
We spend years teaching people to be good enough at everything. The author is suggesting we abandon that entirely. Stop trying to teach the greyhound how to walk on 3 legs, ignore the fact that it can't fetch a newspaper, and just build a track where it can sprint.
But let me push back on this, because I can hear the middle managers of the world groaning right now, just listening to this.
I'm sure they are.
Isn't that just asking for massive special treatment? How can a company function if an employee just flat out refuses to do the boring administrative parts of their job, or refuses to conform to the team's schedule simply because they find it neurologically stressful? It sounds like a recipe for resentment from the rest of the team and total organizational chaos.
That is the standard reflexive pushback, and it is almost entirely rooted in an emotional sense of fairness. Why should this person get to skip the boring meetings? Why do they get their own office?
Yeah, exactly. People would be furious.
But the author reframes this pushback using pure, unadulterated corporate pragmatism. This isn't about charity. It isn't about coddling an employee or being nice. It is about maximizing return on investment.
Cold, hard cash.
Exactly. The author argues that it is the direct responsibility of management to create this specialized environment because it directly and aggressively boosts the bottom line.
If you let me work alone and skip the morning huddle, I will produce 150 units while your perfectly synchronized 6-man team produces 50.
Precisely. Forcing a highly capable neurodivergent person to prioritize group harmony or standard operating procedure over logical efficiency destroys their economic value. You are taking your fastest processor and forcing it to run on dial-up out of a misguided sense of egalitarian fairness.
That makes so much sense.
If a company can strip away the social friction, remove the administrative burdens, and simply point that hyperfocus at a specific problem, the sheer volume and quality of output from that individual can be astronomical. The author is essentially saying to the corporate world, don't accommodate me because you pity my disability, accommodate me because I will make you more money than anyone else.
It's such a beautifully logical, almost utopian vision of how things could be. But the author is realistic. They admit they haven't really entered the mainstream workforce yet, and they doubt this argument would fly in a standard, rigid job interview.
Most HR departments wouldn't know what to do with that pitch.
No, they wouldn't. Which brings us to a really sobering reality check in the source material. What happens when the author looks at the actual current landscape of employment for people with disabilities? The reality on the ground is far messier and much more painful than the utopian theory.
We move from the theoretical ideal of the hyper-specialized environment to the lived trauma of the existing employment systems.
The author is standing at a crossroads, looking at the 2 real-world options available to them in Japan, though this binary system applies almost globally, really.
It's a very common structure.
Option A is to try to survive in general employment. You apply for a regular job, you try to fit in. Option B is to utilize the disability employment quota system, where companies have specific, legally mandated, adapted roles for individuals with disabilities.
2 heavily flawed paradigms. One demands complete assimilation, and the other demands segregation.
And the author brings in a vital, heartbreaking anecdote to illustrate the reality of these choices. They recently attended an online support group specifically for women with developmental disorders, and the stories shared in that digital room highlight the agonizing extremes of this catch-22.
What did they share?
First, let's look at the agony of option A. One woman in the group shared her experience of working in general employment. She hides her traits. She pretends to be neurotypical to blend in with her coworkers. And she describes it as an utterly exhausting, painful existence.
We call that masking. And to use our tech analogies, masking is essentially running a highly complex emulator program on top of your native operating system.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
You are constantly manually monitoring your own eye contact. You are policing the pitch and tone of your voice. You are actively suppressing your physical tics or stims. You are manually deciphering the implicit social cues of everyone around you.
All while trying to actually do your job.
Right. All while trying to perform the cognitive tasks of your work. The cognitive drain of running that emulator 40 hours a week is catastrophic. It is a one-way ticket to the exact burnout the staff at the youth center warned about.
So hearing that, you would think option B is the savior, the disability employment quota. A workplace that expects you to be disabled, where accommodations are built in, where you don't have to run that exhausting emulator program.
But it's not that simple.
No. But the same woman from the support group visited one of these specialized quota workplaces. And her experience there was devastating in a completely different way. She walked in and saw individuals with severe intellectual disabilities, people who were visibly struggling with basic life tasks. And she had this stark, brutally honest realization.
This raises an important question, a realization that forces us to confront the severe limitations of broad categorization in our social systems.
The woman's conclusion, which the author heavily and painfully relates to, was this: I would rather hide my disability, suffer, and work with normal people than work in that environment, for my mental health and for my tribe.
This touches on something so fundamental about the human ego, about identity, and about how systemic infrastructure fails nuance. The disability employment system often lumps all forms of disability, physical, intellectual, developmental, psychiatric, into one broad, generalized category of other.
Just a giant bucket of not normal.
Exactly. For a neurodivergent individual who has high cognitive capabilities, who might be able to process complex data or optimize an assembly line, but who has severe executive function or sensory processing issues, being placed in an environment designed for severe intellectual disabilities can feel profoundly invalidating.
The author explicitly states that they have fully accepted their diagnosis. They know who they are, but they admit there is still this incredibly powerful, deeply human desire to just be normal, to be seen as a peer by mainstream society, not as a charity case.
Because the fear of losing one's dignity or the fear of being infantilized by a system that views you only through the lens of your deficits is terrifying. The psychological weight of that dilemma is immense.
We have to weigh it out every day.
They are forced to calculate every day. Is the neurological damage of masking in a mainstream environment worse than the psychological damage of being segregated and potentially infantilized in a specialized environment?
It is an impossible choice. I want you to just pause and imagine the sheer exhaustion of having to choose between your comfort and your dignity every single time you clock in for work.
It's a Liz-Lee's situation.
You either tear yourself apart trying to fit into a mold that hurts you, or you accept a label that society uses to diminish your potential. The profound loneliness of that situation is just staggering. You're either lonely because you are surrounded by people who don't know the real you, or you are lonely because you are officially cut off from the mainstream world.
And this is exactly why the author's earlier point about corporate pragmatism is so vital. It offers a desperately needed third path, a path where the individual doesn't have to mask, but also doesn't have to be segregated.
A path where they can just be themselves and be valued for it.
Right, a path where their unique operating system is integrated and leveraged for its actual value, rather than suppressed to make others comfortable or hidden away to check a quota box. But until society catches up to that logic, individuals like the author are left trapped in this agonizing catch-22, panting over cardboard boxes and burning out in office cubicles.
It really brings the whole journey of this source material into sharp, undeniable focus. Let's look back at the ground we've covered in this deep dive. We started with the physical, visceral reality of the neurodivergent brain, the rapid, anxious breathing, the heart palpitations, and the chaotic desk over a simple piece of Mercari cardboard.
The microfrictions.
Yes, and we traced how that cognitive overload scales up, overflowing the brain's RAM in kitchens, busy streets, and loud offices. We witnessed the incredible, explosive, but deeply exhausting power of hyper-efficiency on the assembly line, proving that these brains can outpace the standard model if given the chance. And finally, we confronted the heartbreaking societal barriers that force brilliant people to choose between their mental health and their pride.
It is a comprehensive, profoundly empathetic map of the neurodivergent experience, from the microfrictions to the macro systems. And my final thought on all of this is that true inclusivity isn't just about offering a slower assembly line.
Right, the staff at the youth center meant well, but they were missing the point.
They were trying to fix the wrong thing. True inclusivity is about fundamentally rethinking what an assembly line should look like in the first place. It requires us to abandon the idea that there is only one right way to process the world and to recognize that different is not a synonym for broken. In many of the most important cases, different actually holds the key to better.
It's about building the environment around the person, not forcing the person to contort themselves to fit the environment. And that leaves me with a final provocative thought for you listening right now. Think about your own life, your own workplace, or your own daily habits. How much of your energy or the energy of the people around you is being entirely wasted trying to force a uniquely wired brain to run on a standard operating system?
A lot of wasted potential.
And what incredible things might happen, what problems might we solve if we finally stopped fighting the wiring and started building a world that actually plugs into it. Next time you find yourself taping up a cardboard box, maybe take a moment to appreciate the invisible, silent processes that let you do it without a second thought. And remember that for someone else, that same box is a battlefield. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you, and we will see you next time.